When a flawlessly engineered weapon is plunged into thick, bottomless mud, it doesn't matter how sharp the blade is, it simply becomes stuck. In the mid-1960s, the American military arrived in the theater of war with a logistical footprint that dwarfed anything the region had ever seen. They established massive deep-water ports and sprawling supply hubs to feed a modern war machine. They held absolute dominance in the air. Supersonic jet bombers could cross the country in minutes, delivering thousands of pounds of high explosives with a single button press. On the ground, heavy artillery units provided a screen of constant firepower, capable of leveling entire grid squares from miles away. On paper, this concentration of wealth and high-tech weaponry suggested a total dominance that few expected could be challenged. But the actual battlefield was a landscape of rice paddies and thick jungle, defended by rural peasants using basic farming tools to supplement their small arms. Standard military logic assumed that without air power or heavy armor, these defenders would be eradicated by conventional sweeps in a matter of weeks. The defenders realized that facing this force directly would be suicide. Survival required moving the war into a space where high-speed jets and heavy artillery simply had no targets to hit. The limit of aerial bombardment is that it requires a visible, surface-level target. If a base or a supply line isn't on the map, it can't be bombed. To exploit this, the resistance relied on a specific piece of counter-technology, the standard-issue shovel. They began a massive excavation effort, carving out miles of interconnected underground networks that eventually moved their entire infrastructure beneath the feet of the invaders. These weren't just simple holes. As this diagram shows, they were complex, multi-level systems, housing living quarters, hospitals, and armories, all positioned well below the explosive radius of a surface blast. By digging deep, millions of dollars in aviation technology were bypassed by the simple act of moving the war into the dirt. The military responded with saturation bombing, dropping thousands of tons of explosives to churn the earth itself. But this created a new problem. It left behind millions of unexploded duds. The peasants began tracking these duds, quietly excavating the high-grade American explosives by hand. They repurposed the material from these duds to build hidden traps and mines, which were then planted along the very patrol routes the Americans used to search for them. The next countermeasure was biological, highly trained tracking dogs deployed to sniff out hidden guerrilla fighters and their buried traps. In response, the defenders scavenged discarded bars of American tactical soap and placed them near their tunnel vents. The dogs, trained to ignore the familiar scent of American troops, were unable to distinguish the enemy's positions from the scent of the U.S. patrols they were supposed to be protecting. Every expensive, highly engineered offensive by the superpower generated a lethal and low-cost countermove from the local defenders. This dynamic took a heavy psychological toll on the U.S. forces, finding themselves in a landscape where the threat was always present but rarely visible. The locals' mastery of the terrain created an environment of permanent paranoia, where any step could trigger a trap made from the military's own supplies. The economic disparity was just as stark. A single daily bombing sortie cost millions in fuel and hardware, while the counter tactic, a handmade trap, cost virtually nothing. The shovel had become more than a tool for survival. It was a weapon of economic exhaustion that forced the superpower to fight a war on terms it couldn't win. Exhausted by the invisible threat, facing a drained treasury, and consistently outmaneuvered by simple tactics, the technologically superior force eventually withdrew. It was a realization that modern militaries continue to study. Overwhelming firepower often fails when it meets a sufficiently high level of human resolve. Huge budgets and advanced silicon chips are not a guaranteed advantage against a defender using radical, desperate ingenuity to protect their home. On any battlefield, the most difficult weapon to overcome is a person who refuses to leave and has the patience to outwork a machine.